All right, that was kind of a hanging curveball that he ended on. But this is fundamentally the control of men over women, apparently. So I am doing this only because I want to control my wife, I guess. I'm not going to delve too much into that because I think people's personal experiences probably suggest that that's just not true, and I'm not going to take debate on that. But the fact that men and women, where I left off, the idea that men and women are in fact different, that we recognize that in all sorts of different ways, and to say that these relationships are in every way the same is to deny that there is a difference between men and women. And that is something that every kindergartner could distinguish between the relationships just by looking at them. And now we're having a discussion about whether or not a language should be able to distinguish between them as well. One way I like to analogize this, and I've made the pen and pencil analogy, is what would the world look like if we insisted that in the name of pencil equality, all writing instruments of every kind be referred to as pencils? You don't necessarily lose your awareness of the fact that there is such a thing as a pen. You just are now forced to refer to everything as a pencil. So every time you ask, hey, can I have a pencil? The follow-up question is, well, what kind of pencil? Why would you ask that? Because you know that there's a difference between a pencil and that which we now call a pen. The same thing would happen if we redefined marriage to include all manner of combinations of people regardless of gender. Is, oh, once you're married, well, what kind of married are you? Why would we follow up that question? Because it matters and everyone knows it. So the semantics argument here is kind of bizarre. This is a very unique situation where we're trying to redefine the English language. And so I think that's an important thing to, when we apply the logic that is being used in this argument to any other arena, whether we want to call dogs cats because they're all furry, they have 4 legs, and they have tails. They're really quite similar. Why shouldn't we use the same term to refer to all of them? Because they're different. And that's an important principle in this debate, is just because things have similarities doesn't mean they're the same. And that's why the equality that he spoke of in terms of rights, which is very real. Same-sex couples, same-sex families can do pretty much what they want, and we think that's how it should be. But there's a big difference between being able to make decisions for yourself, adopt children, own property, do whatever you want in your own personal life, and then redefining a language so that people who disagree with you are forced into a hole where they lose the ability to express themselves in a way that's consistent with their belief system, where they lose the ability to conduct their businesses and make decisions in a way that's consistent with what they think. And I want to talk to you a little bit about how that works, because the third point, and I left you hanging the last time, is that does the benefit outweigh the cost of these things? And I do, and he made an important distinction, is that I'm going to talk to you about some examples here that are not all specifically related to the redefinition of marriage in this debate. But this larger debate that we are having is whether or not we are going to be free in the public sector to distinguish between heterosexual and homosexual relationships. Is that something that we as a society are going to be free to do? It has nothing fundamentally to do with marriage. And I want to talk to you about how this plays itself out in other jurisdictions. In the state of New York, the state most recently redefined marriage, there are court clerks fighting for their, the right to have their jobs because they have been told if you are not willing to sign your name to a same-sex wedding license, that you just have to find another job. Employment opportunities. There are doctors in the state of California right now who are Catholic, and they provide in vitro fertilization services. They would only provide IVF for people if they could provide both a mother and a father. That, of course, excluded single parents, and it excluded same-sex couples. They're in federal court defending their right to do so. Do we believe in this country, do we believe in the freedom of individuals to run their private medical practices in a way that is consistent with their personal convictions? I say yes. The other side of this argument says no. You're right that it is entangled in the discrimination statutes, but it's all one big issue, and you can't just focus on the tree and lose sight of the forest. In adoption services, religiously affiliated, Catholically affiliated adoption services in D.C., Illinois, and Massachusetts are all out of business for one reason or another, basically because they would not do what the state told them, which was you must place children with same-sex households. Now, you personally might not have a problem with placing children in same-sex households, but the question is, should somebody who does have a problem with that, should the government use their police powers to compel someone in their ministry to their community as they see it, to do something that violates their conscience or force them to no longer do it? I say
I say we should have the freedom to do that. In England, which is of course a totally different jurisdiction, but it provides context to this. There was a couple there who had been foster parents to 15 children who had no mother and father. And then they would not tell their children, however, that were in their care that heterosexuality and homosexuality were in every way equivalent because they were Christians. And the High Court there in England said that you are not, because of your beliefs, you are no longer qualified to house orphans through the foster care system in your house. Because, and the quote was, traditional Christian notions about sexuality are harmful to children. The High Court said it was harmful for these parents to tell their children that they should restrain their sexuality to heterosexual monogamous marriage. You might disagree with that, but is that harmful to children? That's the question. Counselors in Georgia, she was approached by a lesbian couple for relationship counseling. And she didn't think that was the best alternative for them, so she referred them very politely to another counselor who was subsequently commended for her counseling services. Yet the clients came back and complained against the original counselor, who was dismissed from her job and basically told, if those are your beliefs, basically the counseling profession is not for you. Therefore, if you hold these convictions, these employment opportunities are not open to you because they're inconsistent with the ethics of the counseling profession. A student in Michigan, very similar situation, was told she could not get a degree. She was not allowed to get from Eastern Michigan University. She could not graduate and become a counselor because she had convictions about sexuality, which included heterosexuality, homosexuality, the related issues that we're talking about here. In Washington State, since we've created a domestic partnership registry, fewer than 1/4% of the state has bothered to get into a domestic partnership. Fewer than 1/4% of the state has bothered to get into a domestic partnership. The thing that's going to change, the benefit of this redefinition of marriage, is that fewer than 1/4% will be able to say they're married. Again, no practical differences, but they'll be able to say they're married. Now, you as policymakers weigh the benefit of that. They now get to say they're married against in at least 32 states in this country have voted on the issue of marriage. On average, more than 60% of those states have voted that marriage should be between one man and one woman. We'll find out how this state feels, but it's pretty close to 50-50 probably in this state, give or take a few points. Should we give less than 1/4% the opportunity to say they're married? In exchange, we have told at least 50% of our state who has convictions that are different, that your employment opportunities, your ability to express yourself in the public square, that your ability, and you made reference to the wedding photographer situation, where in the state of New Mexico, there were wedding photographers who were approached for the opportunity to take pictures of a same-sex commitment ceremony. And they very politely declined because that just wasn't something they were comfortable with. A complaint was filed against them in the Human Rights Commission in New Mexico. They were fined $6,600 because they didn't want to take pictures of something, as if there's a constitutional right to have your picture taken by the person of your choice. And as Representative Pederson said, that's already been taken care of. That's already the law. There's already a mandate that you have to take pictures of, if someone wants you to. And the problem with this bill, and the distinction it fails to make, is that has nothing to do with sexual orientation. If two gay people come and said, hey, we're going to do a bake sale, will you take pictures of it? They'll say yes. That's very different. They're not discriminating on the basis of sexual orientation. They're discriminating on the basis of marital status and what they believe marriage is. I'll take pictures of your bake sale. I don't want to take pictures of the wedding ceremony. Is that something in a free society that people should have the right to do? I say yes.
I'm going to start with the last point and work my way back up because this is the classic non sequitur. One of the things that I guess I'll ask you to observe about these examples from New Mexico, from Michigan, from Georgia, from England, these are from California, these are all states where when people get married who are same-sex couples, no, in fact, in most of those states there are actually constitutional amendments that prohibit people of the same sex from getting married. That, I think, is the clearest illustration that you need that what Mr. Backholm was talking about is a larger, different societal discussion about sexual orientation and appropriate discrimination against people who are gay and lesbian, and the way to balance religion and sexual orientation in terms of liberty. It doesn't have anything to do with marriage. As I said, we have families with children, families of same-sex couples who are here already. And frankly, if this were going to become a huge issue in our state. My partner and I, now nearly 8 years ago, had a ceremony in our church, Central Lutheran Church on Capitol Hill. We had a photographer, we had musicians, we had caterers, and all sorts of people that we hired who, incidentally, were happy for the business. And I think that's the common reaction from people in the wedding industry, that they'll be happy to have larger employment. But if there were a huge problem in our state based on the anti-discrimination law, frankly, I think we would have seen some evidence of that in the last few years. I want to talk for a second about the idea that it's only about love and commitment. I don't think that love and commitment are unimportant, and in fact, I value the right to be able to stand up in front of the community and say to all of you and to everyone else that Eric and I ought to be treated the same way as all of you expect to be treated in your relationships, that we want to be married, that we are making that kind of a permanent vow and commitment to each other. But that's not all that it's about. It's about a whole web of expectations that we have with our family, with our friends, with people as we take our kids to school and have those interactions. It's about how our kids understand our relationship and the commitment that we've made to each other. Marriage is a very special word, and there is no good reason to exclude a whole class of people in our society and in our state from access to that very special word and that very special understanding of their relationship. Now, I'm kind of disappointed that Mr. Backholm goes back to where the Singer court was in our state nearly 40 years ago, when they looked at the claims of Joseph Singer to equality in marriage from his government, and essentially said, well, we just opened up Webster's, and it says that marriage is between a man and a woman, so of course you can't marry someone who is of the same sex. Let's try to cut a little deeper than that. This is not about pens and pencils, and it's not about dogs and cats and being able to distinguish. Anyone who doesn't want it, isn't creative enough to find ways of distinguishing in terms of his or her own private communication between the relationships of same-sex couples and those of different sex couples is not being sufficiently creative. The fact is that there aren't legal distinctions for the most part that go with pen and pencil or with dog and cat. We are talking about a fundamental building block for our law and for our society in terms of the way that relationships are treated. One of the earliest pieces of work that I did on this question was with pretty primitive search methods back in 1996 to go through the revised Code of Washington and try to find all the ways that unmarried couples and married couples were treated differently. At that time, I identified 360 statutes that treat people differently. That list has since been expanded to 525, at least as of the time of the court case. At the federal level, there are around 1,100 different rights and responsibilities that come with marriage. It is a huge list. And I should note, along the lines of the federal issue as well, that although the Federal Defense of Marriage Act is still in place for now, I predict that that's only a matter of time before that falls, there are all sorts of ways in which the federal government has, around the edges, whether it's in terms of taxes or deportation or employee benefits for federal employees, has begun to take into account the relationships of same-sex couples and to move toward equal treatment of all citizens. So again, the label marriage, unlike the label cat or the label dog, is one that is fraught with legal significance and that means a great deal to the people who are involved in it. And so you come back fundamentally to the question of why our government, this is our government, my government, your government, why is our government in the business of treating some of its people differently? And not just differently, because we aren't just talking about having two different drinking fountains, as bad as that was. We're talking about a situation where our Supreme Court said it was essentially okay for one set of people to be able to use the drinking fountain and the other people to go thirsty without any protection for their families. We've come a long way as a state, as a society, toward rectifying that. I think that the polling that you see on this issue indicates that we're coming closer and closer every year. The people who are in your generation are apparently in the neighborhood of 3/4 in favor of marriage equality for same-sex couples. So it really is only a question of matter of time before that changes and the political process starts to undo all of the wrongs in this particular regard that have been wrought on gay and lesbian people over the course of many years. But for now, what we're talking about is how quickly that's going to happen for people in our state, for the families and the kids who need these protections now, who deserve these protections now, and whom you have the power to give these protections to now. Guess I want to close by saying I've said for a year, I think it is quite likely that Mr. Backholm and his Patriots will be successful in gathering the necessary signatures to put the referendum on the ballot. I hope that you all are registered. I hope that you all are planning to vote, because really, the fate of my family, the fate of families of your friends, neighbors, are in your hands. And whether it's right or wrong, you are going to get the chance to decide whether they are treated equally. I sure hope that you will. Thank you.